In this lecture now, we will take a look at how we can texture all the individual parts of the speaker. Before we continue, let's take a look at the project folder and how I restructured it. So I put the blend file into a folder, Harmon Kardon. There is the original blend file. That's the one I use for modeling. And here is another version. That is the one for texturing. I just simply made a copy. That's very often the way how I work. One version is just all the modeling, because in there I have the conceptual exploration, etc. And then in texturing, that is just the file where, well, I set up the scene, bake everything, and render. As I mentioned in the previous video, it is very good to have a master texture file where we have all the various commonly very often used textures, but then specific project or project specific textures we can put into a texture folder inside the project folder. Here you can see I have vertical and a linear pattern. I also have the PDF here. I can put this actually into references. And I took 2 photos. This is a very good practice for everybody who wants to learn modeling and rendering. Try to model and render objects around you, because in this way you can not only take measurements, but you can take photos. And in this way you can study how does the surface actually look like, instead of guessing till something looks good. These metal patterns, on the way, let me go to Blender, Chrome. I use it very often when I'm on the go or I do light work. Gravit Designer, which is a web-based, let's say, Illustrator clone. It's free with limitations, but also the Pro version is actually ridiculously cheap. The nice thing about this is it is browser-based, and for creating patterns, mockups, etc., very often I have to say this is just perfect, because it has everything I need minus all the clutter, for example, Illustrator comes with, including the Illustrator price tag. So I'm not going to necessarily explain how I set up everything in here. I'm just quickly showing you kind of like the process. So I took a screenshot and brought in this reference image, because then this shows me where, for example, let me actually hide those. Show guides there. Where I can see where are all the material separation lines. And then you see here from a side view orthographic, I took a screenshot of my model and scaled everything so that they perfectly line up. You see bottom, top, and also these material separation lines. That helps really a lot to plan, for example, the textures, so the patterns I have here. I brought in also here this reference photo, just so I can see how this looks. And here are just 2 attempts. I simplified this a little bit, rotated in vertical. This is a very common technique to do. You just make a line and then you give this a dashing. Now see here, by adjusting this, I can add more or less structure to it. These blue fields, if you ask yourself what this is, this comes basically from interface or website design. These are called slices. Basically, I can tell the software to export an image based on what is inside these 2 slices. And then I export those as, for example, here I selected those 2. Then File, Export, only what I want. So the selection, you see it's a whole image or these 2 pieces. Double the size so I have more pixels, transparent, export, perfect. Okay, now so just as a quick introduction. When you know Illustrator, honestly, picking up something like Gravit is very easy. The thing is, they all have selector tool, align tool, pen tool, text tool, and it literally is all the same, which is the reason why I very often like using this. Okay, these two vertical and horizontal textures, they are actually supplied for you. We will go back to this in one moment. And let's go, however, first back to here. So this is the textured version. And I can clean this up a little bit. I have, for example, here this reference image, which is in the background. Now I would like maybe to move this to the side. So here all this is activated again. I can select it and then simply G and X, move it to the side. Cool. So now I can actually see better the lines. Or maybe, yeah, G and X, I will do it this way. Makes it even easier. Okay, you will see soon why I'm doing it that way. And I'm locking this reference thing again. So this is my second revision. That's the model that is good. So let's hide this. And then we see all this stuff. This is the interface. Yeah. This is the feet. Okay. Good. This stuff. X and delete. We don't need this anymore. Draft. What do we have here? Delete. This ring I will keep. I will put this into interface. And then here, references. Yeah, we can keep the references. This is actually good enough for when we work more on the materials. Okay, very good. So, maybe let's hide this for the moment. All good. And I will, yeah. Oh, now we have to bake this geometry. You remember this part we actually created via curves because this gives us very smooth surfaces. We don't have to polygon model it because the curve system does it for us. So ideally what we are now trying to do is to bake this into actual geometry. So let's start actually with the bottom one. That's the most interesting part because it also has these the grid stuff in it. So here's the profile bottom. I will press Shift D and escape. Right click in the collection outliner, new collection, and then we call this one textured. And I can just simply call this bottom. Sock. This reference object, this whole thing, I will move to here. Instead of reference image, let's call this one spec image. Okay, and then this we can hide. And there we are. So what are our options now? Before we do this, as a refresher, let's take a look at how we created this. So first, this is a curve object. So I have a subdivision here. When we go to wireframe mode and zoom in, you see this is very, very dense. When we lower the subdivision, you can see how choppy this can get. Now the goal here is what we want to do. Least amount of polygon faces, but maximum amount of detail. Now this is not good. Obviously, this is visually perfect, but workload insane. So we need to find something that where the curves still look good. And yeah, looks like 12 actually. The faces are a little bit smaller than I want, but this detail, for example, from here looks pretty good. Okay, so that was one direction. Now the whole thing is just made by a spline, and then we're using the screw modifier. So here's our screw modifier. There are the steps. When we lower this, you see also here we can do exactly the same. So let's go to our top view. So 18, nah, 32, what about this? From a distance, let's zoom out, shade it. Yeah, it's kind of like okay. When we zoom in more, then we can see we have the facets. 64, yeah, it looks really nice. Now, if we, however, even there when we zoom in more, you can see the facets. So you should not go to something like 200 because, or even more, because then it gets super, super dense. So 64, yeah, what about 50, 40, 30, 40. Yeah, maybe 40. We will, no, we're not going to show it from here, but I'm just paying attention to this parameter, or the outline. So 40 is good. So that means now what we can do, this is all set up well, we can mesh it. So this is basically the mesh preview. This is what we will get when in object mode we say now, convert this curve object into a polygon mesh object. Click mesh, go into edit mode. There we are. So you see it's actually quite an amount of points. Let's undo and undo and undo. So we are back actually to just a curve object. Actually here I will go with 20 on purpose, just so you can see. You see now this is much coarser. Okay, now so that's basically, we said 40, 30, last try. It's actually okay if you take a little bit of time before you do this, because once you do it, it's done, to figure out, do you really like this? Is this good? So I might actually try this out with 30, because I will not show the object from the top. We will see it more from here. So in my case, the vertical resolution, so what we have here, that is actually more important now, so it doesn't look so jaggy. So 10, yeah, good. And ideally you want to keep this now in mind. We have to also, so this is 10 and this is 30. So when we mesh the next object, it actually is exactly the same. So with that said, let's go ahead and do it. So there's this one, Shift D and escape. Bring this in, call this top. We can hide this. So why is this so important? There you can see how this does not really line up. So here this needs to be 30. Okay, so this lines up. And then this can go to, what do you see? What do you say? 10. Yeah, that looks good too. Very good. Now, both of those can easily be converted to mesh. Zack. And when I click mesh now, you will see here how, for example, this icon from a curve switches to a triangle, so a mesh. Cool. There we are. So that's basically the process, then how we can take our curve geometry, which we set up first while exploring the design nicely, and then create a polygon mesh to make it actually easier for us to apply textures to various parts, because this grid system, we want to wrap around it. And that I will show you in the next video.